from each happily ever after, every wish upon a star. Let's break down the movies that shaped who we are, from memory lane to now and everything in between. The most famous of films to the ones we've never seen. Decade by decade, all the times we laughed and cried, and with a little pixie dust, they will all take flight, reliving the feelings, and we're trying our very best. And if they mean the same to you, please be our guest. So hop aboard, we would love to have you as we hang with a certain mouth, the whole gang too. If you love nostalgia stuff, we hope this does the trick. Thanks for joining us as we deep dive the magic.
Hi, and welcome back to the Deep Diving the Magic podcast. I'm KJ.
And I'm Jeffrey. And we are back with Deep Dive number 59, the 59th Disney feature-length film from June 6th, 1962. It is a film called Big Red.
We have come so far.
Have you heard of this before? Because I hadn't. Big Red is based on a 1945 novel by American author, I'm going to mess this up, but it's Jim Keelguard, we'll say. Keelguard. But let's go ahead and pass over to my friend KJ right here for a quick synopsis and some opening thoughts.
A wealthy sportsman's decision to hire a backwoods orphan to exercise a champion Irish setter has unexpected consequences.
Yeah, I can see it. If you loved Old Yeller, this might be right up your alley. Not like in a bad way. It's just
if
like
you loved Old Yeller,
it's very like animal coming of age. But
all right,
would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So, Big Red, 1962, is a heartwarming family adventure film produced by Walt Disney Studios. It was adapted, like you said, by the 1945 novel of the same name, set against the lush and untamed landscapes of, guess what? We're going back to Canada. The movie weaves a touching story of friendship, responsibility, and the bond between human and animals. So,
yeah.
The dog the dog opens up. The film opens up at a dog show. And ironically, our little pup was watching it with us at the beginning.
True.
And we like to tell her that she can't go to a dog show because she would win best all around. So, and it would make the other dogs feel terrible.
Would never stop barking.
Oh, whatever. Anyway. So you see, the story begins with a wealthy dog breeder, James Hagen. He is played by Walter Pidgeon, who lives a solitary life on his sprawling estate in the Canadian wilderness. Hagen is a proud owner of a prize-winning Irish setter, which he bought at that dog show for $5,000.
Yeah. So speaking of $5,000, I looked this up. So this film, I was going by 1945 when the novel came out. $5,000 in 1945 is $87,600 today.
Could you imagine paying that much for a dog?
I mean, you love your dog.
We have spent a lot on our dog lately, but
$87,600.
Not that much.
So sorry about that. Back to you.
Okay. So anyway, Hagen is the proud owner of a prize-winning Irish setter named Big Red, a magnificent dog with impeccable pedigree and a future in show competitions. Despite his admiration for Big Red, Hagen views the dog as an investment, valuing him for his monetary worth rather than his companionship, which you kind of see by the way he treats him. So, Hagen hires a young orphan boy whose name is Renee, and they meet when, I guess, they were hunting. I don't know exactly what they were hunting. The kennel keeper or caretaker, I don't know what you would really call him, Anyway,
Emil was his name, right?
yeah, he's out with Hagen. They had guns and two dogs that I'm assuming they were using for hunting.
Mm.
Don't know what they were hunting. But Renee walks up on the owner's property, Hagen, and he walks by the dog kennels, and Red is standing there, and he kind of is all excited to see Renee, but he gets his arm stuck in the gate. So Renee opens it up to help get him out, and then he's checking on it. At this time, Hagen, I'm assuming, fires his gun, and then Red takes off. Um, and that's when he runs past Hagen and those dogs, and he's like chasing fowl. So they must have been fowl hunting of some sort. Which Renee at that point still goes after the dog because he's trying to catch him to bring him back. And then he ends up talking to him when he's walking back after he's got Red. And he explains that he's looking for work. He wants to do something for money because his uncle, who he was living with, died. And he needs to work to make a living.
Which is why he was at the kennel in the first place. He was trying to find a job.
Yeah, so he's trying to find a job. He explains to Hagen that he is learning English from a book and looking for work. So Hagen hires Renee.
He gives him his belt back because he took off his belt to like
Yeah.
grab the dog. Yeah.
Hires Renee as a caretaker on his property. And then we discovered that Renee is a spirited and resourceful, quick little boy who forms a deep bond with Red. And you see through their bond that Renee treats him more as a companion and a friend
Renee, yeah.
rather than a trophy.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Hagen, Renee understands the dog needs its freedom and play, allowing Red to express his natural instincts rather than keeping him confined and groomed for shows.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point, Hagen explains to him that at one point these dogs were really good for like hunting and stuff, but that's kind of been bred out of them now. So really now they're just good for shows. And he's like, you understand? And Renee's kind of like, yes, but I really don't think he agrees with him. Anyway, so Renee and Red spend more time together. They develop a close friendship. You see that through some of their little
like walks and stuff.
Walks and runs. And Renee trains the dog in ways that prioritize his trust and companionship over like the strict discipline approach that Hagen's has. Anyway, this bond between them actually causes some friction with Hagen, who had someone from a kennel club come over.
So can I backtrack a little bit first before
Yeah.
that? Hagen finds that Red is inside. He's inside Emil's house, who like must live on the property.
Mhm.
And like, so Renee loves the harmonica.
Mhm.
Like he's an Andy, has a band. And he was playing the harmonica while Emil and his wife were like cooking and dancing and having a good time.
Mhm.
And the dog was like underneath the
Table.
table. And then Hagen gets there and he's like, hey, Red is not in his kennel. What's going on? And they're like, oh, it was my fault. I took him in, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
So then he's like, oh no, like my dog is, this is all happening.
I don't think he really cared at that point.
Okay.
I think he started to care at the point where he, at that point, realizes when he has the guy from the kennel club come over to get his feedback on how Red's doing, and the guy's like, no. And then Red sees Renee in another dog's kennel spraying something, I'm assuming for pests or something. But he sees him in the kennel and he's kind of like, all his attention goes to Renee every time they walk by and completely gets off track. And then that's when the guy was like, is he pretty close with that kid? And the guy, Hagen's like, yeah. That's his caretaker, and he's like, I think he has a bond with him. And then so they have Renee walk him, and then all of a sudden the show dog comes out and he's walking around like he's supposed to. And then that's when Haggins was like, okay, so the dog has to stay in my house and he can't see Renee until we leave for the show because like I have to fix this. Why he couldn't have just had Renee show the dog beyond me. Disney magic would have ruined the whole movie, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, they've separated the boy and the dog. Tender moment. Anyway, at that point, Haggins is just worried that this is just going to ruin all of his potential.
Can I add something else in there?
Sure.
I think we missed another spot where when Renee was still allowed to see Red, he was walking Red, and
and he let him go,
and like he like loses his shoe, and then Red gets out, and like Red like runs away, and he runs and he falls like in like a barn or whatever, and gets like a bunch of like stuff in his coat, like
sawdust shavings,
and like rocks and
which
stuff.
Is basically when the Haggins told him this dog used to be a very good hunting dog, but now this has been bred out of him.
So like, and Haggins like, like this is the fur that I need this to be like award winning, blah 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 blah. So then it cuts to the rest of it.
All right. So anyway, the boy and the dog are separated, which is like a big to do. The dog's not handling it very well. The boy's not handling it very well. And then it's like the night before they're supposed to leave for the show. And Renee just wants to go say bye to the dog. But the caretaker's like, no, you can't do that. And then he kind of does, and then somehow the dog senses that the boy is outside. So he runs over, but it's like he keeps missing each window he's been at. And then the boy's walking away, and then the dog pulls the curtain back and sees him.
Knocks over the chessboard.
Yeah, not yet. And he's like, sorry, boy, I can't come in, but I just wanted to say goodbye. And then he speaks to him a little bit in French too. And then he starts to walk away. And then after he walks away, the dog just kind of like goes crazy. He knocks over the chessboard, hits the cupboard where the dishes and stuff fall out, just keeps making a mess. Finally, like loses his mind and jumps out the window.
Breaks the window. This time the window
jumps was closed. Through the window.
This time the window was closed.
Busts the glass, and apparently it cut him pretty bad.
It did, yeah.
And then you see like the dog's back in the kennel, where the caretaker is like, I guess in the medical area of the kennel, and the caretaker is like assessing the injuries and stuff, and he's like, no, it's pretty bad. And Haggins is like, okay, just put him down. And then Renee's crying, and he's like, no, you can't do that. And then he's like, well, you don't want him to suffer, do you? And Renee's like, no. And he's like, okay, put him down. And then he walks out of the kennel. And you can see that Emil, the caretaker, is kind of like torn between like, this is what my boss wants me to do and what I want to do. Because I don't think he wanted to put the dog down either. But anyway, he takes the stuff that he's going to use to like euthanize this dog into another room to like pull it up into the syringe and stuff. I think he was just trying to let Renee have his moment with Big Red or whatever.
He was giving him time.
And then when he comes back in there with the syringe, guess who's gone? Renee and Big Red. They're gone. Nowhere to be found. So Renee takes Big Red up to his uncle's cabin.
He carries the dog the whole way.
Yeah, he carried him all the way. And it never really told us how far.
24 miles.
Oh, 24 miles. I guess it did.
Well, it was 24 miles from where they fell in the barn. I don't know if it was 24 miles from the house.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so Renee carried Big Red all the way to his uncle's cabin. He brings him inside, has like a little pallet bed for him, makes them food, has a fire inside the cabin. And he's like, yeah, you're stiff, but we're gonna fix this. And he's like over there doing like little physical therapist stuff, moving his legs and like occupational therapist stuff. You'd be proud of him. He's in there working with this dog, trying to make him feel better, making sure he's eating. Um, and pretty much like nurses him back to health.
Yeah.
It shoots to another scene later where the dog is finally able to like get up and walk again. Um, and he's outside working with him. And then it shoots to a scene where Hagen is sitting outside. I can't remember if he was reading a book or a paper, but he was sitting outside reading and had a drink of something. I don't know. And all of a sudden, an Irish setter runs up beside him and he's like, "Oh, hey, Molly, how did you get out?" Da, da, da. And then he like turns around and looks and he's like, "You're not Molly. Red, how did you get back here?" And then he's like, and then you see Renee walking behind him and he's like, "I took care of him." And he was like, "Well, you nursed him back to health. He'll be back at the shows at no time." And then Renee's like, "No." And then he shows him like the scar that Big Red has. And he was like, "Oh, well, he'll be a good stud dog now. We can't always have everything."
Mhm.
But at that point, like you can still tell, like Renee's like, "I did do what I was supposed to do." So he's like, um, talking about how he's gonna leave, and he's like, "No, I didn't say I fired you. Da, da, da. You can come work for me." And he's like, "No, I think I should go find work elsewhere." And then he pretty much just leaves. Um, he ends up finding work on a farm. Um, and then you see Molly, the dog, the Irish setter and stuff. She's there. She's expecting puppies. Hagen is on the phone and he's talking about how he's going to sell the dogs. And I don't know who exactly he's talking to. I don't think it really ever said. But he said, yeah, and she's due to have puppies in 3 weeks. You make sure you keep one for yourself or whatever and just sell the others. And then he hangs up. Emil's wife is there and she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, what's the comments?" "Oh, no comments." Because she always offers comments during
Mhm.
this and basically kind of talks sense into the guy. Um, and he ends up going through with it and sells the dogs. Um, and then at one point, Renee pops back in the picture trying to get a cow back on his owner's property. And then come to find out, the cow has wandered into Hagen's property. And he's like, "Oh, you're on da da da's property. You can't be here. It's private property." And he's like laughing. He's like, "We got to get you back." So he's like leading the cow back. And then Hagen comes through and he's like, "Oh, hey, Renee, how are you?" Like, obviously, this little boy has grown on him, but it's an awkward relationship. So um, he tells him he's working on the farm and kind of goes off. Um, and then was that the time where he told him that Red was gone? That he sold Red?
Yeah, he basically says that he's
Yeah, so I guess
selling the animals.
in the midst of the thing, he sold the animals. It goes to like a train scene where Big Red and Molly are in a kennel cage on the train, and the caretaker that's supposed to be watching them is trying to put water in their cage. And he starts laughing because he sits it outside, and the dogs are just kind of looking at him, tilting their head. And he's like, "I know, silly me, putting the water out here where you can't reach it. Let me see if I can get this undone." And he like fiddles around with the lock and stuff on the cage, and then finally gets it to where it's unlocked to put the water in. But then the train stops abruptly, and then come to find out there is a moose on the track.
Mhm.
So the train had to stop. And then the conductor and the engineer were like, "Listen, you got to get rid of it again." And he's like, "This can't be the same moose." And they're like, "It's the same moose." And apparently this has happened before. Well, apparently this guy can apparently make moose noises. So they make him go off in the woods to make moose noises to lure the moose off the track. So he does this. But in the midst of doing all of this, Red pushes the door open because the guy unlocked the cage. And him and Molly are sitting there looking outside the thing, and then they jump out. So then by the time the train starts going again, the moose is off the track and the guy jumps on. The dogs aren't there.
Dogs are gone.
So backtrack again to where I was. So Hagen runs into Renee, and then before Renee walks away, getting the cow back on the property, he asks, "How's Big Red doing?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I sold them, and they ran away out in the Canadian wilderness." Like, and he's like, "Oh, well, when did that happen?" And he's kind of said the timeline of it, and he's like, "And nobody's looking for them?" And he's like, "No, but show dogs like that would never make it in the wilderness, so it's a lost cause, so nobody's looking for them." And Renee's like, "Somebody should be looking for them." And then the guy's just like, "No, nobody's gonna go look for these dogs." And then Renee goes off with the cow, takes it back to the property, and then some stuff happens in between. I don't exactly remember. And then this freaking cow again pops up on his property and is eating a bush. I'm not sure what kind of bush he was eating. But the guy was like, "Hey, you again." So Hagen's like, "Okay, well, we got to get you back." And then the owner comes on his horse that owns the farm, and he was like, "Yeah." And then he starts telling him, "Well, if anything happens to my cow, I know who to blame because it ate your bush." And he's like, "Well, my bush looks worse for wear than your cow." And he's like, "Well, if she's poisoned or it messes up her milk, then it doesn't matter in Canada, the rich or the poor, da da da." And I'm sitting here thinking, dude, your cow's the one that busted through his fence on the property. You should have had it in better fenced area, whatever. So anyway, he starts going off, but before he leaves, Haggins asks, "Well, how's Renee?" And then is his name Mario or Martin?
Who?
The farmer.
I have no idea.
I think it was Mario. Anyway, the farmer is going off, and then Hagen stops him and he's like, "Hey, how's Renee?" And he's like, "How would I know? He's been gone for 2 weeks. He's probably setting up at his uncle's cabin with playing his harmonica nonstop." And then Hagen's was like, "He's been gone for 2 weeks?" And he's like, "I guess, I don't know. He's not showed up for work and I've got things to do." So then he kind of like leaves. And at that point, it goes back to the scene of like being in the house, and then Emil walks through. His wife is packing a bag with food in it, and then he asks like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh," and she's talking about how Haggins is gonna go hunting, and he's like, "Oh, what's he hunting? It's not deer season, so da da da." And she's like, "Hopefully a middle-aged boy or a medium-sized boy." I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
A medium-sized boy. And he goes, "A medium-sized boy? Who's he? Renee?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know what other medium-sized boy we know of." So he's like, "Oh, I should go with him." And she's like, "No, you can't go with him. An emotional journey only has room for two." So she won't let her husband go because I think she knows that he cares about Emil, or not Emil, Renee, and that Hagen is going to need to go by himself to do this. So then you see Hagen on a horse going up through the wilderness in Canada trying to look for him. And then you see Big Red is still alive with Molly. Of course, Disney magic, 3 weeks has passed at this point, and Molly needed to have her pups. So she found a cave to stop and have her pups in. And then, ironically, Renee is looking for this dog, and he's cooking, and then somehow Big Red finds him, and then he's like, "Oh, hey boy, I was looking for you, but then you found me." So he's like, "Oh no, you're just skin and bones. I brought you something though." So he like gets some kind of meat out of his bag and gives it to Red, but then Red takes off with it. So he quickly grabs some stuff and then like follows him. And then Red leads him to the cave, and Red drops the meat down in front of Molly. And that's when Renee discovers that Molly's had her pups. And he's like, "Okay, you're bringing the meat to her." So at that point, he looks over at the pups, and he's like, "What a family you've got." And he talks about how the dad's always in the way. And He doesn't remember a lot about his mother, but he remembers that one of the things his mom would say was, um, the woman always does the work while the man lays down. A woman's work's never done, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and he talks to Molly, and he said you'd think he was the one that had the family. Um, and then he talks about how they're going to go back, but they have to wait till the puppies are big enough to travel. And then it shoots back to another scene of him being in the thing, in the cave with the two dogs and the pups, and he's um, basically just giving the pups time to grow so that way they can travel. And he talks about how him and Big Red are going to hunt for them while they're waiting. And then you go back again and you see another scene of Hagen and on the horse. And then you see this big like mountain lion that's kind of like
The horse
stalking
had
him.
like a human name. I thought it was pretty funny. I don't know what it was. It was like Michael or something.
Yeah, Mike, I
Yeah.
think, or something like that. Because I joked around about how his name should have been Philippe.
Mm.
Anyway, so the horse sensed the mountain lion, but obviously our fearless leader did not, and he just kept going. And then they kind of get closer to the mountain lion. The mountain lion makes its little noise and spooks the horse. The horse ends up throwing Hagen's off, and then Hagen's end up rolling down this like little ravine with rocks and all this jazz. And then he ends up at the bottom. His face is cut up, and he can't get up because there's a huge rock or two on his foot that's got him pretty much pinned to that one spot. Then he looks up and he still sees the mountain lion staring at him. And of course, Disney movie, his gun is just out of reach. He can't grab it.
Takes his belt off.
He takes his belt off and he's trying to get it very, very slowly. But Disney magic again, Renee and the dogs with the pups are making their way back home. And Red was off like hunting a deer. And then Renee tells Molly, that's the thing about Red. He loves to hunt, but he never catches anything. So he hears the mountain lion and then he takes off running and ends up finding Hagen. And Hagen's like, oh, hey, Red, just fetch my gun. Fetch the gun. But then Red sees the mountain lion and pretty much takes on the mountain lion. And Hagen's is like, no, don't do that. Like, leave him alone. Don't.
Yeah, you're not going to win this fight.
Yeah. And then at that point, Renee runs down and Molly runs down with him. He sets the bag down.
With the pups in it.
No, actually, so Star Wars moment, the mountain lion had the higher ground and Red did not, and the mountain lion was about to attack Red from like jumping height and pounce on him, and when he jumped, Renee shot him. And then Renee runs over, he sets the puppies down, and Molly follows him. And then he checks on Hagen, and Hagen is telling him that was a good shot. And he said, but my foot's a little bit stuck. So he helps him get unstuck. And then they basically walk all the way home. Nothing's ever said about what happened to this horse.
He does say, let me know if I lean on you too much.
Yeah, let me know if I lean too hard.
Yeah.
And before they left, he made a deal with him because he said, would you be okay if I worked for you again? And then Hagen said, no, you're not going to work for me again, but you are going to live with me and you're going to go to school. And he basically explained to Renee that this is a deal, and a deal is when two parties benefit from something. So he says, you need an education and I need, and then Renee says, I know, and I would love nothing more than to live at your house and go to school. So at that point, then they pick up and then they go home. And then it shows a scene of them finding their way home, the dog's running, and
The pups are running.
the pups are running. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, wow, how much time has passed? Because those little puppies got very big compared to what they were. Steroid pups, Disney magic. Anyway. I think that's pretty much it.
That's the film. The
Yeah.
end. Happily ever after.
Yeah, it was a good film.
Yeah.
It was a touching moment. I did look over at Faye and I was like, I don't know how many movies we have to watch where they almost kill the dog.
I'm sure there's more coming. But yeah, so that was the film. That was Big Red.
Mhm.
What did you rate Big Red?
So IMDb gave it a 6.3. I gave it an 8.
8.
I did give it an 8.
You are loosey goosey with those 8s, my friend.
I only did it because the love between the animals.
Speaking of, here comes our Big Red right now. So did this make your list upon a star?
At times it was a tearjerker, so I'm sorry. Tearjerkers, it's going to take a lot for a tearjerker to make my list, even though I rated it an 8. So I'm pretty sure I rated Moon Pilot a 7 and it made my list, but
It doesn't make your list.
it doesn't make my list.
List upon a stars are your personal thoughts. So what is your list upon a star?
So my 1, 2, 3, okay. There we go.
For those listening, our pup has joined the party.
She only jumps when you count to 3. Otherwise, she just dangles like dead weight.
So speaking
All
of
right.
dead weight, let's talk about your list upon a star.
So my list upon a star is 101 Dalmatians, The Parent Trap, Sleeping Beauty, Dumbo, Lady and the Tramp, The Three Caballeros, Moon Pilot, The Shaggy Dog, Peter Pan, and Alice in Wonderland.
And mine is also not changing. My list upon a star is 101 Dalmatians, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Babes in Toyland, Pinocchio, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Sleeping Beauty, Lady and the Tramp, and The Swiss Family Robinson. Well, my friends, we've made it through 59 deep dives. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Instagram. We would love to hear from you at deepdivingthemagicpod@gmail.com. You can write to us about how convenient that our pup over here got here just in time, talking about a dog.
Time.
But our next film, we have made it to number 60. 60. That's 6 times the list upon a star. From September of 1962, it is a film called Almost Angels. And I can't wait to talk to you more about it then.
Thanks for deep diving the magic.
Bye.
Bye.